In this episode of Problematic Taxonomy, plagiarism, Islamophobic conspiracy theories, yet more bird fraud, and treason against the King of Pigeons. Our story today starts with John Moore, who in 1735 published a book succinctly titled Columbarium, or The Pigeon House, being an introduction to the natural history of tame pigeons, giving an account of the several species known in England, with the method of breeding them, their distempers and cures. As I said on our timeline, this John Moore is relatively obscure. For those doing their own research, be aware there is another, slightly later John Moore, who is better known and even made it onto Wikipedia. That's not our John Moore. Ours is a quack physician and pigeon fancier, most famous for treating tapeworms and being mocked by the Scriblarians, the original Swifties. 30 years later, another work hits the press, this one published anonymously. Is it a sign of their humility? Well, there's reasons to think not, starting with the title. A treatise on domestic pigeons, comprehending all of the different species known in England, describing the perfections and imperfections of each, agreeable to the improvement and great perfection they have this time arrived at, together with the method of building a loft, furnishing a loft, area, trap, etc. The method of breeding the most curious and valuable sorts, as practised by the best fanciers. The generation of pigeons in general, with a philosophical description and progress of the egg, with observations and remarks on their diet, the distempers they are chiefly subject to, and the method of curing them, as practised with success, the fraudulent methods used in the sale of bad pigeons, clearly and fully demonstrated, etc., 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 carefully compiled to the best authors, to which is added a most ample description of that celebrated and beautiful pigeon called the almond tumbler. This book is often framed, at least within the context of its scarce online mentions, as an edition of Moore's Columbarium, revised and updated by anonymous fanciers. The book itself says it follows the plan of Moore's Columbarium. There are instances where the treatise itself refers to Moore's Columbarium, finding commentary on or skepticism towards statements from the original. However, if we take it to be a revised edition with commentary, it's never clear when we're reading the unfiltered words of Moore and how much has been revised by an anonymous fancier outside of those instances of clear commentary on Moore. That is, until we compare the texts side by side, which, thanks to resources like the Biodiversity Heritage Library and various facsimile reprints, is easier than ever. By the way, this is not the last book following the plan of Moore's Columbarium, or books descended from it. By 1790, there are at least two subsequent versions of The Complete Pigeon Fancier that repeat much of the same material again, but claims to be written by Daniel Girton. We're going to focus on just these two for today, though. Before I start explaining, I should probably make my case that this is plagiarism. Let's look at some clear examples of deliberate plagiarism to demonstrate that the other omissions of credit are not accidental, but part of a purposeful concealment of attribution. Looking at pages 27 and 28, we can see a clear obfuscation of sourcing, now infamous on YouTube as the Blair Classic, being done all the way back in 1765. Towards the bottom of page 28 of the treatise, we get a personal anecdote quoted from John Moore, introduced with Mr. Moore says. But comparing it to pages 12 and 13 of the Columbarium, we can see that Mr. Moore also says everything that came before it. Looking at page 45 of the treatise, we have a quotation from a source delineated from the rest of the text and attributed to its author, but this is just duplicating exactly what Moore wrote in the Columbarium. On page 46, he continues to repeat Moore's exact words, even copying the phrase, which I look upon as the best book he ever wrote, when describing the work of William Salmon. And I'm not even the first person to call out how many people are plagiarising John Moore. In 1858, John Matthews Eaton published a very influential commentary of Moore's work with extensive notes, and he points out how many books are heavily based either on Moore directly or on books that copied him almost completely, often with minimal credit. Eaton suggests that by comparing them side by side, you can see what's contributed by each author. However, I think I am the first person to demonstrate that our anonymous fancier contributed even less than previously thought. There are some really beautiful passages in the preface that call nature a book lying open to every eye. There's a real feeling of the wondrous spectacle of nature. I'm sad to report that the book, lying open to our eyes, is apparently from an English translation of The Spectacle of Nature by Noel Antoine Plouche. I wasn't able to find the passage in the original, But whether this quote is verbatim interpolated or added by our translator, this is definitely not the work of our anonymous fancier. Once again, he pulls the Blair Classic, making a reference to the book and then copying more of it, and not even from the same section here. It also seems like we're past the point of parody when you're plagiarising the preface of your own book from multiple different books. Like this should be the mission statement and motivation for writing the book, but the author is recycling the work of dead men as his own. This should be the easiest part. But maybe the author wasn't very keen on revealing their own personal motivations. Anyway, putting the two books side by side, one of the first things anyone would notice is that the treatise is far longer, and it's illustrated. The first sections of both the Columbarium and the Treatise are in many ways very similar to pigeon or other basic animal care books that you will find today. It tells you how to house your animals, their requirements in terms of setup and husbandry and diet. The second part is a clear predecessor to works like Levy's Encyclopedia of Pigeon Breeds. The last section of the Columbarium is excised from the Treatise, however this is no great loss. A account of some medicines prepared by John Moore is really a marketing exercise by the author. We're not getting any guidance on how to prepare these medicines, not even information about their mechanism or dosing, merely positive testimonials from apparently satisfied customers. These books don't build towards an overall argument or point, so instead let's look at some overarching themes. I want to be clear that for the following list, I'm talking predominantly about the treatise. 1. Science, principally biological sciences, particularly the anatomy, physiology, and relationships between the proposed pigeon species. 2. Religion, opinions relating to Islam and Catholicism. 3. Class, blatant snobbery. 4. Animal abuse, and not exclusively to pigeons. 5. Animal care advice. 6. Pigeon-based fraud. And number 7. The almond tumbler, and what I would contend are the motivations for the treatise. In page 9 of the Columbarium, or page 15 of the treatise if you prefer, we get some pretty accurate information, sourced from Dr. William Harvey's Treatise on Animal Generation. It's true that female birds, like mammals, are born containing all their future eggs. Harvey was clearly informed by dissection and close observation. On page 14 of the Columbarium, we get a little extra attribution for Dr. Harvey's treatise, but so far as I can see, anonymous fancier has not actually sourced any information from Dr. Harvey's work, not already present in Moore's original. In fact, I would argue that saying his main source is Harvey when his main source is Moore, quoting or paraphrasing Harvey, is entirely disingenuous. Page 9 and 15 also show a distinction between birds and the fowl kind, i.e. birds that feed their young like pigeons, compared to more closely chicken-affiliated birds, which after hatching are able to feed themselves independently. Looking at the polynomials Moore gives us, we can immediately see certain groups. The tabullaria, meaning message carrier group, the gutturosa, or enlarged throat group. We can presume that this bird in the overlap has properties of both groups. The domestica group, which shouldn't require translation, is subdivided by geographical areas. Moore also tells us about many toys, pigeons kept for aesthetic reasons. This might not seem a meaningful distinction to a modern audience, but pigeons played a far greater role in society until very recently. Within the toys, which is stated, is a group based on purpose, not relationships. We can see some groups. The cuculata, or hooded pigeons, the tremula, or trembling pigeons, and the numidica, or North African pigeons. The Columbarium was published the same year as Linnaeus published the first edition of Systema Naturae. However, Linnaeus revised his work constantly, and it's the 10th edition of Systema Naturae, which is recognised as the starting point of modern animal taxonomy. That edition came out 7 years before the treatise. The period between these two publications was pivotal in the development of biology. The title of the original states that it gives an account of the several species of tame pigeons known in England. All of the birds listed are breeds, or mutations, that belong in what is now identified as Columbolivia. Other familiar birds, such as the wood pigeon, stock dove or turtle dove, are absent, as they were not tame pigeons. What you can see here is the belief that at least some of these pigeon types have distinct origins, and that those species can be identified by external features. These ways of thinking would later be formally challenged. Among others, Lamarck proposed evolution and living links between species, and Darwin would use pigeons to demonstrate the difference between a type and a species. However, John Moore is already putting strong arguments towards the artificiality of certain breeds and questioning the provenance of others. For example, on page 86 he says about the horseman, "It is to this day a matter of dispute whether this be an original pigeon, or whether it not be a bastard strain, bred between a carrier and a tumbler, or a carrier and a pouter, and so bred over again from a carrier, and the oftener thus bred, the stouter the horseman becomes. The only thing that seems inclinable to favour the opinion that they are original is a strain of this kind brought over from Scandaroon, which fly very great lengths and very swift, but still the answer readily occurs that they may be bred originally the same way at Scandaroon, and so transmitted to us, but that we cannot determine." Moore has an awareness that certain features that can appear very striking and distinctive when comparing two specimens may actually represent points on a continuous spectrum. Moore also comments that he's placed the nun next to the Jacobin and Capuchin because of their thematic names. The Jacobin and Capuchin are named after monks, despite the rough, the third hooded breed being most similar to the Capuchin and Jacobin. The anonymous fancier also keeps the Jack and Capuchin with the nun, but he comments that the owl should be next to the Jacobin because it is, in his opinion, the next most attractive breed. The lace pigeon is one of the entries added by our non-fancier, and this breed, like a few others, is not found today. However, I think we can probably identify what this one was. Our next episode will be exploring the breeds in more detail, with the help of modern day experts, so subscribe for that. The Columbarium expresses a deep and sophisticated Islamophobia. It's not the result of ignorance or of a cultural bias in writing about topics that naturally intersect with Islam. Moore goes out of his way to include conspiratorial beliefs and Islamophobic propaganda in a book ostensibly focused on cataloguing all of the species of domesticated pigeon found in England. Between pages 8 and 12 of the preface in the Columbarium, Moore, while talking about the high status afforded to pigeon keepers in many Muslim countries, dives into a 3-page tangent quoting a propaganda story, self-consciously imitating biblical Daniel, but this time to demonstrate that Christianity is the true faith and Islam is not. The plagiarist clearly feels it isn't necessary enough topic for a pigeon book, and just exercises that tangent, as seen on page 11 of the Columbarium. And because Moore told us where he got it, here it is. It seems likely to me from this quotation among others that Moore could read French, which I can. I also don't know if our plagiarist can either, as he stole specifically from an English translation of Plouche. Moving on, page 25/53, Moore quotes from the 6 Travels of Jean-Baptiste de Vernier, quoting a section stating ownership of pigeons in Islam is one of the rights reserved to Muslims, and a factor in converting certain people. Now in regard the Christians are not permitted to keep these pigeons, some of the vulgar sort will turn Mahometan to have that liberty. This one was sufficiently pigeon-related enough to make it into the Columbarium unedited. I think that's good evidence that it's not anti-Islamic sentiment the plagiarists can't tolerate, it's more going off topic. Page 28/75 gives us an interesting positive mention of Muslims. Near this place is a small house, like an hermitage, dedicated to Isa ben Maryam, that is, Jesus the son of Mary, in passing which place the Mahometans themselves very devoutly offer up their prayers. Obviously Muslims do venerate Jesus, or Isa ibn Maryam, and it's very interesting that Moore, while condemning Islam, can still praise the piety of Muslims. Pages 29 and 30 of the Columbarium, or pages 77 to 79 of the Treatise, retells a story, apparently from William Lithgow. The story describes how crusaders intercepted a messenger pigeon by all shouting together, essentially knocking the bird from the air. Moore finds this story unbelievable, even if it does support Christianity. Instead of self-reflection here, he instead takes the opportunity to throw Catholicism, a much closer threat to Protestantism, under the bus. The story to him seems too much in favour of Romish superstition. Page 51 of the Columbarium, or 140 of the Treatise, gets us to the entry on a breed of pigeon named after the Prophet of Islam, the Muhammad. We'll explore the identity of this bird in future, but for now let's just focus on the religious aspect. The Muhammad. This pigeon is no more in reality than a white barb, which makes the red tuberous flesh around the eyes look very beautiful. All that can further be added with regard to this pigeon is to assign the reason why this name of Mahomet is given to it, which I take to be this. Mahomet, the impostor prophet of the Turkish religion and author of the Al-Quran, is reputed by some authors, and those of good note such as Scaliger, Grotius and Sionita, to have made use of the following stratagem to induce the credulous Arabians to believe that he conversed frequently with the Holy Spirit and received from him his mission as a prophet and the new doctrines he was about to broach. This imposture he carried on in this manner. He took a young pigeon of this kind which we are now describing, and which by the immaculate whiteness of its plumage was not an improper emblem of purity and the celestial dove. This bird he brought up by hand and made it very tame and familiar, till at last he taught it to eat meat out of his ear, which he might easily do, especially if he fed it with rape or hemp seed there, which all pigeons are naturally very fond of, till at last the pigeon would come frequently to search for its food there. This bird he imposed upon the Arabians to be the Holy Ghost, whispering the dictates of the Almighty and teaching the precepts of his new law, and from hence this bird is called after him by the name of Mahomet. This is an entry that the plagiarist was apparently less keen to take credit for than the others, and states 3 times that he's quoting from Moore here. Moore finishes out his entry on this bird with another tangent that was excised from the Treatise. The Columbarium tells the story of Zainab bin al-Harith's attempted murder of the Prophet. I'm no Islamic scholar, but I'll outline it as best I can. I want to be clear in my retelling, I'm not relying on the Columbarium as a source. This story follows in the wake of the Battle of Khaybar, which took place in 628 CE in modern-day Saudi Arabia. There are several semi-contradictory accounts of the battle and aftermath. The battle itself was fierce. Muhammad's forces fought multiple sieges at small fortresses to seize control of the city. Khaybar was inhabited by Jewish Arab tribes, and was seen as a threat to Islam both by taking in exiles from the early Muslim state and as a potential leader of neighbouring non-Islamic tribes. Zainab was a young woman from one of the major families of Khaybar and married an exile from Medina, Salam ibn Mishkan. Salam was a rabbi, warrior poet and opponent of Muhammad. He would die leading Khaybar's garrison alongside Zainab's uncle, father and brother. Seeking retribution for her lost family members, Zainab decided to take matters into her own hands. She approached Muhammad's companions to inquire about the Prophet's food preferences. Learning he preferred shoulder of lamb or goat, Zainab set out to poison him. She roasted the lamb and poisoned the shoulder pieces. Zainab waited for Muhammad's entourage and asked him to accept her gift, which he did. When they sat down to eat, Bashar bin Bara bin Marua, apologies Arabic speakers, and the Prophet both took shoulder pieces. Bashir would be paralysed for a year, before finally succumbing to the damage caused by the poison. His death would be the reason that Zainab would be executed a year later. Now we come to the controversial point of the attempted assassination, whether the Prophet himself was harmed. Accounts agree that Muhammad, upon taking some of the meat, called for Zainab and questioned her. She admitted to poisoning the meat, saying that a prophet would be protected by divine revelation. Muhammad appears to have endorsed this position because Zainab was initially set free by the Prophet for his attempted murder. He did not face capital punishment until the poison finally claimed Bashir, the unintended victim. Some sources suggest the Prophet may have sought medical treatment such as cupping to treat the poisoning. Others suggest he consumed only a small amount himself before the poison was revealed to him. The position, traditionally viewed as heretical, is that it contributed to Muhammad's death 4 years later. These questions often come down to interpreting from quotes whether he suffered stomach pains from this attempted poisoning, eventually contributing to his death, or whether the Prophet merely compared the pains he experienced before death to the pain of being poisoned earlier in his life. Columbarium takes the most extreme trutherism version of this story in its continued attempts to discredit Islam. Okay, we're almost through the Islamophobia. We should just make one more stop in the Columbarium's glossary, which was just dropped from the Treatise entirely. The Quran here is called the Al-Quran, for the same reason alchemy and algebra have al as a prefix. Europeans accidentally merging the Arabic definite article al, meaning the, onto various names borrowed from Arabic. So what's all this about? Why is Moore as Islamophobic as a 2012 YouTuber debunking religions with facts and logic? Thankfully, other people writing in the modern day have answers for us. Dimmock's 2013 book, Fabricating Mahomet, was immensely helpful in understanding what is going on here, and in far more detail than I will cover today. Quoting from the introduction, "For English readers and writers, there was no Islam or Muslims, only Mahomet and Mahometans. Shared Abrahamic roots connected the two religions. Islam became the dark devil of Christianity." Which is exactly what we've seen from Moore. The Prophet constantly denounced, while the piety of Muslims and the corresponding flaws of Christians is also highlighted. Now, there's a lot of bad things you could say about John Moore, especially after covering his religious views. However, one thing I can say in his defence is that he's not a snob. Our plagiarist, by contrast, definitely is. Comparing page 13 of the Columbarium's preface to 13 and 14 of the Treatise, we see the first hints of this. Moore explains the lack of illustrations, or cuts. "I am very sensible that proper icons are a very great service to illustrate a work of this nature. But this piece being in its kind new, and not being able to guess at what reception it may meet with from the world, I knew the expenses of exact cuts would swell the price too high for many that may have a mind to purchase this work, and, on the contrary, that if they are not delineated with the utmost accuracy according to their various characteristics, they only puzzle the mind, and render the description of them more obscure, and therefore I chose rather to have none than bad ones." By contrast, the Columbarium apparently spared no expense. And as Mr. Moore's essay is very deficient for want of cuts, to convey a just idea of the different species, in order to supply that defect, we have procured engravings from the best hands at a very great expense, in order to illustrate this work, all of which are done from life and very masterly executed, under the inspection of the author and other fanciers. Being well assured that this book will fall into the hands of many of the illiterate part of mankind, who are altogether ignorant in the terms of art, and even in the meaning of many words of more frequent use among the politer part, I have, for the sake of such, added an alphabetical explanation of the less common words made use of in this treatise. I think it's fair to assume he's not talking about people who are completely illiterate, but people with what we might call functional skills. The entry on the almond tumbler, one of the sections heavily rewritten by our anonymous fancier, starts by commenting that gentlemen need not try to breed their own almonds out of other tumbler colours as they originally developed, but can instead simply buy them. On page 62, yes, eagle-eyed viewers, he does give the almond tumbler over 10 pages of the book by itself. It's up to quote his friend absolutely savaging fanciers who keep pouting pigeons instead of tumblers, and do not, like the pouter, require time to be lavished upon them to make them familiar, for the pouter should be almost constantly attended and talked to during the winter season, in a phrase peculiar to that fancy, viz. Hoos, hoos, stroking them down the back, and clacking to them as to chickens. Otherwise they would lose their familiarity, which is one of their greatest beauties, and is termed shoeing, and would make the finest of them appear despicable, which made a facetious gentleman of my acquaintance say that pouters were a fancy, more particularly adapted to weavers, cobblers, and the like kind of trades only, that worked in the same room where they were kept, and the owners might have the opportunity of conversing with them at the same time as they were earning their subsistence. Though I must allow of the propriety of the above observation, I can't help thinking it rather severe than otherwise, for certainly every gentleman has an undoubted right to please himself with the fancy he most delights in. On page 65, this elitism reaches its zenith. A distinction which the Society of Columbarians make is that pigeon fanciers are such gentlemen as who keep the good sort, which are the various fancy and utility breeds. Whether they are almond, black-mottled or yellow-mottled tumblers, carriers, pouters, horsemen, dragoons, leghorn or Spanish runts, Jacobins, barbs, turbits, owls, broad-tail shakers, nuns, spots, trumpeters, etc. Our fancier then gives us something incredibly modern sounding. Those who keep trash are called pigeon keepers, of which last denomination there are a surprising number. It's prodigiously amazing and unaccountable that any gentleman will bestow food upon such as are not in reality worth the tares they devour. It then suggests that people should spend a lot more money buying fancier pigeons, because even if you're going to eat them, it's better to have a higher quality pigeon. So next time, pigeon fanciers are going to react to, among other things, me telling them that their breeds were considered trash. On page 92, when talking about Dutch croppers, our fancier adds that now the gentlemen fanciers in England pay very little regard to this pigeon,
since they have now developed the English pouter from them. And I don't have too much to say about this, except he also includes a tally of sales from a pigeon auction, where 37 pigeons are sold for, in total, over £92, presumably a stunning sum of money at the time. We're going to look at just one example today, which is so egregious that it requires no evaluation by experts. And by the way, this one isn't from John Moore. John Moore says, a pigeon loft ought to be built to the south or southwest, the sun lying warmest on them from those quarters. If you have not that convenience, you make a hole in the roof of your house, and there lay your platform, smaller or larger as you think proper. A carpenter that is used to such work will put you in a method, always remembering to erect proper works to keep off those tormentors of the gentlemen of the fancy, the cats. For in one night's time they will make a very great havoc, and are generally observed to destroy those pigeons which you most value, so that it is better to be at some charge at first to prevent the incursions of such dangerous and fatal invaders, who seldom or never give any quarters. This is where our anonymous fancier goes off one of his own tangents. Notwithstanding, the cats are natural enemies to pigeons, it's a very common thing to see one in most pigeon lofts, which are put there when very young, and by proper methods being used with them, such as sometimes beating them with dead pigeon, and holding an egg made hot to their nose, which intimidates them from touching the eggs, etc., they are naturally become very afraid of them. They will never hurt either the eggs or your pigeons, provided they are constantly supplied with food. And they're extremely necessary in a loft by keeping it clear of rats and mice, which are full as destructive to the pigeons as the cats. I mean, this is obviously terrible advice. Just baffling advice, really. Next time we'll dive into many elements of the text in more detail with the help of experts, including animal care. However, as a little preview, here's some advice I doubt anyone needed. Turning to page 28 of the treatise, we're informed, pigeons love salt, yet too much is very pernicious. For instance, if in a voyage you give them salt water instead of fresh, you will soon kill them. That is true, but you shouldn't really need someone to write it down for you in your animal care book. Pigeon fraud. Another episode, another opportunity to learn more about bird fraud. And we're not including the accusations of fraudulent pigeon-based prophecy against Islam. This is a whole new pigeon fraud, and as I keep saying, next week we'll dive into yet more pigeon fraud that will require experts to help me unravel. But for now, we're going back to pages 9 and 10 of the Columbarium, or page 19 of the Treatise, where Moore warns us a trick used by unscrupulous pigeon dealers. It's the opinion of most, and not without great probability, that all the eggs a hen will ever lay are contained in this vitillary or cluster, and that as soon as this number is exhausted, she will become effete or barren. Some people, therefore, to abuse mankind and vend a useless bird, will oil up the vent of a barren hen and force an egg into it, to make you believe that she is not effete. If you happen, therefore, to be thus imposed on, you may not lose your seasons of breeding by keeping such a hen matched to a good cock. First off, this isn't abusing mankind as much as it is henkind, in my opinion. But absolutely staggering. Didn't expect this at all. Number 7. The almond tumbler, and this is my conspiracy theory. Throughout the book, our anonymous fancier is effusive in his praise of the almond tumbler. The financial value and breed quality of the almond tumbler is stressed at length, alongside their many other apparently outstanding qualities. Just reading the treatise before I ever read the Columbarium, I could be certain that these references are the voice of our anonymous editor, because the title of the book specifies that the description of the almond tumbler is an addition. While he does reuse elements of Moore's work on tumblers, he removes Moore's opinion that, for example, almond is a vulgar name for that colour of tumbler. My initial impression was that the writer had a real fixation on the almond tumbler, and seems to think they have been unfairly slighted, particularly in that they have not always been, as he assures us now is consensus, have been agreed on as the king of pigeons. He tells us that once this title was afforded to the carrier, but that considerable improvements have been made in the quality of tumblers in recent decades, and that now everyone is convinced that the true king of pigeons is the almond tumbler. Putting the text side by side, I was shocked at how much of Moore was entirely unedited, also which elements came from our fancier, the elitism, the fixation on the almond tumbler, and that a lot of the additions were specifically rebutting Moore's brief mention of carriers as the supposed king of pigeons, something Moore doesn't seem overly exercised about, which clearly animated our anonymous fancier, provoking more writing from him than on any other topic in the whole book.
I should also say that Eaton, back in 1858, made his own j'accuse at the author of the Treatise. He speculates that John Mayer, who the Treatise is dedicated to, may have been the president of the Columbarium Society, mentioning various additions to the Treatise, and that the Anon fancier was a member of the society trying to curry favour, who later, having got away with the plagiarism once anonymously to test the water, then released the next 2 stolen versions. Remember Daniel Girtin from earlier? Yep, he's back. Eaton thinks that Daniel plagiarised the same book at least 3 times. But whether or not Daniel Girtin is the original plagiarist, or one of the many second and third order plagiarists to keep stealing and re-releasing this book over the next century, this idea does support my theory. The Columbarium Society of this period is almost entirely centred around almond and other tumblers. Clearly it's a breed gaining popularity in the scene, but how do you legitimate your new pigeon society based all around the almond tumbler when the go-to pigeon book of the time is saying that the carrier is the king of pigeons? You steal the book, and you steal the throne. Because the books, based off the Treatise, carry on the line that the almond tumbler is the king of pigeons, and by the Victorian period they would be the most prestigious pigeon breed in England. Subscribe for next time, as with the help of experts, we get even deeper into this absolute textual mess.